Right, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Breaking into Privacy. My name is Dr. Kyle David, and I'm very excited to have a panel of privacy experts to share the stage with today. Before we get into our panelists and introducing them to you, I wanted to share with you a couple other webinars, events that we have scheduled for the next couple weeks here. So for those of you that had signed up for the fireside chat with Paul Morrison yesterday, due to an uncontrollable technical problem, we had to postpone that. We've rescheduled that for next Wednesday. I believe it's going to be 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is a fireside chat with Paul Morrison. He's the author of the Substack AI Book Review. So he reviews the best books in AI that are out there. That'll be scheduled for next week. Also, I've launched an AI safety reading group. So the textbook that we'll be focusing on for 8 weeks is Introduction to AI Safety by Dan Hendricks. It's actually Introduction to AI Safety, Ethics, and Society. So if you're interested, that's another event that we have going on through April. And then finally, I haven't started collecting reservations or registrations for this yet, but on January 14th, which is a Wednesday from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be having a chat with a researcher at Stanford University on AI red teaming. And this researcher, her name is Evelyn Lee. She's responsible for an inventory of AI red teaming tools. So if you are also in the AI space or you're interested in any of those topics, you can follow me on LinkedIn and you can register for those events. All right, with that said, let's move into breaking into privacy. So I just very briefly want to introduce the panelists that we have here, and then we will get to hear from each of them. So first we have Veronica Canton, and she is a multi-award-winning AI, cybersecurity, and privacy attorney at an Am Law 100 firm. She's a graduate of Notre Dame Law School, and she advises businesses and individuals on incident response and regulatory compliance, as well as AI and privacy compliance program development and technology law matters. Veronica was named the 2024 and 2025 Cybersecurity Woman Law Professional of the Year by the United Cybersecurity Alliance. She is founder and chief vision officer at Optimized Leverage, where she creates education and leadership tools to empower professionals regarding AI, cyber, privacy, tech, and professional development. Welcome, Veronica. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Next is Sri Pravalika, and Sri is a privacy engineer in Google's search privacy team and is passionate about keeping billions of users safe and improving trust in Google's products. Prior to joining Google, she was the first privacy engineer at Autodesk, where she built the privacy assessments and metrics program from the ground up. In her role at PwC, she helped Fortune 500 companies build security GRC programs and performed maturity assessments. She built her career in security and privacy with a master's degree in cybersecurity from Northeastern University, Boston, and a bachelor's in computer science. Sri is actively engaged in shaping global privacy policy and industry standards through engagement and publications at RSA, IAPP, USE/NIX, and NIST. Welcome, Sri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Charles Cutshall. He is an executive with JP Morgan Chase & Co., where he serves as the global privacy and data use lead for compliance and operational risk. He is responsible for firm-wide oversight of privacy and data use related risks. Prior to joining JP Morgan Chase & Co., Charles served as the Chief Privacy Officer and Director of Open Government at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where he led the department's Privacy and Freedom of Information Act programs. He previously had privacy and regulatory roles with the Executive Office of the President, the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Charles is a member of the Robert S. Brookings Society at the Brookings Institution, a certified information privacy professional, and an associate adjunct professor at the American University Washington College of Law. Thank you, Charles, for joining us as well.
Thanks, Kyle.
All right. Again, really appreciate your time and the audience's time joining us this afternoon. So the objective of this webinar is, to introduce people to the topic of privacy and data protection, specifically from the job seeker's role. So our topic is breaking into privacy. And we've got folks here that are interested in perhaps pivoting into privacy or maybe making some type of career change, or perhaps early career professionals. So I think it would be useful, all of you are well established in your careers. First, we just love to hear, and Veronica, will start with you. If you could tell us just a little bit about yourself and your path to privacy.
Thank you so much. I started my exposure to privacy started in law school, where a professor was teaching a data privacy law class. And the reason why I got so into and very passionate about privacy is because this professor connected law to just everyday life. So it wasn't a theory class where we read through, old school cases. We had some of those, but it was everyday activities. And so every week he would challenge us to identify areas in which we were sharing personally identifiable information or personal health information, to the point where we would all come with different things, right? When we go shopping, a dentist office, anything that you generally don't think about. And so it started there. My career thereafter, like after graduation, I started as a commercial litigator. And the law firm where I started, we had a very small data privacy group. And so what I did while I was a commercial litigator is I built on the knowledge and the skills that I knew I needed to transition into this type of role. So I started taking seminars like this one. I started taking continuing legal education for lawyers, right? So to continue to stay certified. I started networking with people who, through LinkedIn, who connected me with people who were doing the work. And literally they told me the roadmap that I needed, the skills, certifications. And so it wasn't only the law, and to the point, to Dr. David's point, that he's made throughout his, the presentations that he does and so on. It's not just law, it's not just technical. There's so many other skills that help. And so I worked for about a year and a half to 2 years on building those skills and that knowledge on my own until the right opportunity came about. And I transitioned into a role that was privacy specific at Holland and Knight, and then at Paul Hastings doing that plus mergers and acquisitions work related to privacy. So my road wasn't direct into privacy, even though I identified it as an area of interest, but I built the skills, knowledge, and the branding to be able to get into this role and have a lot of fun with it. And I think, part of it is having, figuring out what you like. If you have a technical background, you can go that route. If you don't have a technical background, I will tell you, I had people tell me, oh, you can't do that work because you don't have the technical background. It's not true. There are so many different types of roles that you can get into without the technical background. You do need some sort of technical knowledge, but you don't need a technical background to break into privacy.
That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that that's an important myth to shatter here, is that you have to have, all of your ducks in a line before you actually start applying for these jobs.
Exactly.
It sounds like on your experience that these are, a number of skills that you built over time, and as you were on the job. So that's great.
Yes. And
Thank
I'll
you.
add one more thing just briefly.
Sure.
Any job you have now is going to build, it's going to be a foundation for the skills you need down the line. So whatever job you have, don't think it won't help, because every job I've had has helped.
Excellent. Sri, we will pass that over to you. Just maybe a little bit about yourself and your path to privacy.
Sure. So similar to Veronica, I just accidentally happened to land a role in privacy, actually. So I have a background in cybersecurity. I did my master's here. I have a computer science background. I kind of pivoted into security because I found cryptography interesting. Quite honestly, I took that course in undergrad, and then it's something that piqued my interest. And I'm like, oh, this is a whole new career in cybersecurity. And it was just hot in the US at that point, and me coming from India, I was like, okay, great, let me try this new concentration, if you want to call it. And then slowly I got into consulting at PwC. I did a variety of security, assessments and like network security, AppSec, and um, maturity assessments and so on. And then I was like, okay, I can't live out of suitcase for sure. I need to get away from a consulting role. I need to do something more, product based. And then I was looking for roles, and I happened to find this role in Autodesk, which had both security and privacy. So at that point, I think they were just using these words loosely, or they just add privacy wherever needed along with security. That was the time. And that is exactly the time when GDPR came into effect too. That was around March of 2018. Then I applied for this role. The interviews was mostly about security, my past experience, and so on. Not too much about privacy. And then when I joined, my manager at that time told me, "Hey, all your security experience is good, but your first assignment is going to be performing the privacy impact assessments for all 150 products of Autodesk." That was what got me into privacy. I was pretty much thrown into doing these privacy reviews, and um, there was no real one way to do it. We had like a questionnaire back then. It was not like the most mature process as well. So I really had fun trying to understand how different privacy is from security, and then trying to incorporate some of the skill set that I had. Most of these are just transferable skill sets, because you're really trying to understand what is it that you're looking for when it in terms of keeping the user data private, or preserving the user trust. So what is it that I would look for, I as a user? So I always used to try to put myself in the shoes of the customers and the users, and try to understand what would catch me off guard, like what would really keep me puzzled, and is my data really going to be safe? Like I try to think of all of those things, and slowly I started getting a hang of how to improve these processes, how to make it more efficient, how to focus on like maybe shifting privacy left, and like really thinking about earlier interactions with like engineering teams. And then I also came to understand that this is a fairly interdisciplinary career. So how it kind of interplays with like the different aspects, like IT, risk management, compliance, software development, security. They all need to come together. It's a beautiful dance. So, and then shortly after, I had this opportunity at Google, which was privacy incident response. So I have done security incident response as an internship during my master's, and I must say I thought incident response wasn't for me. I couldn't be the frontline person. My brain would shut off. And then 6 years, pretty much 6 years in my time at Google, I was working on privacy incident response, and I must say that has to be the most thrilling and the challenging part of my career. It was it kept me going. It helped me learn a lot of things about how to think on the go, how to try to understand for every situation, how do we stop the bleeding. The focus is like stop the bleeding, and let's focus on like mitigation, remediation. How do we think about preventing these issues? How do we think about threat modeling? More from a prevention angle and so on. So that's how my career took a slightly different turn from like privacy reviews to privacy incident response, and thinking about preventative controls and detection, and how do we catch them earlier in the process and so on. So um, that's kind of my journey into how I broke into privacy and how I'm navigating different things. And just an update is like I don't do incident response anymore. I made a slight another turn, and I do privacy consulting in the search privacy team. Much a little bit more, you know. Back to where I kind of started with Autodesk, but a slightly different flavor. And now, with the AI privacy and the AI mode that you see at Google and search and so on. So most of our reviews are on that. But it's been a very interesting journey, like how for every turn that the privacy regulations and the privacy industry has taken, I kind of try to go along those turns and like build my career around it. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And I think the two things that really stood out to me about your response is the interdisciplinary nature of privacy. I think depending on what size organization you're at, you may need to do everything, right? You are the interdisciplinary expert. If you're at a larger organization, however, doing more of the risk assessment, some of the less technical work may be a way to get your foot in the door. That's great. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Charles, we'll send it over to you. Again, just a little bit more about yourself and your path to privacy.
Yeah, sure. Dr. David, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation and opportunity to be here with all of you today. First, first I must say that I was listening to the introduction of the other panelists, and I am genuinely humbled to get to share this virtual stage with such accomplished privacy practitioners. And I, alongside the audience, am just really excited to get to learn alongside you and hear about the experience and perspective from these individuals. Secondly, and I think I'm obligated to say this, and maybe I'm saying it on behalf of all of the panelists, the things which I share, the perspectives that I have, the views that I have, those are my own personal perspective views and should not be taken as representing any position of my current employer, JP Morgan Chase & Company, or perhaps even any of my former employers. So, okay, now that we've gotten that very important, sort of important step out of the way, I often say that I did not find privacy, but in fact, privacy found me. My career began in the federal government working on cybersecurity policy at a time when data was becoming both more powerful, ubiquitous, just more complex to govern generally. And very early on in my career, while I was initially, hired to be a cybersecurity policy analyst, I was offered the opportunity and I found myself doing a developmental learning opportunity, a rotation in what was the Department of Homeland Security's privacy office. And up until that point, my exposure to privacy-related issues was largely in my personal life. And it was largely me clicking the X at the top of a privacy notice and largely disregarding any of the text in said notice. And when I started to engage with privacy as a professional, I was immediately drawn to it because I found that I was working on things that I, just as an everyday person, as an individual, cared about. And that I found it to be intellectually stimulating, and I found it to be a lot of problem solving. And it was I found myself just in a very, surprising way, in a very unplanned way, working at the intersection of a bunch of things that I'm just passionate about, like law, technology, ethics, and human behavior. And over the years, one thing led to another. And, Dr. David shared my introduction in the various organizations that I've had the privilege to support. I just fell more deeply in love, for lack of a more appropriate term in a professional context, but just truly, truly deeply in love with this field. And what's kept me in it from that moment that I had no idea what door I was stepping into and the work that I was going to be working on when I joined that privacy office is truly the why behind privacy. And it's about respect for individuals. It's about human dignity. It's about nurturing and fostering a relationship of trust between individuals and their clients, their customers, and other organizations that you're hoping to do business with. And it's, for me, as much as I've loved doing it as a professional, and now I have the privilege of getting to teach at American University as well, it's about ensuring that as technology advances And it's been really interesting to be on this journey as we've seen the different evolutions of various technology and how data is being collected about individuals and how it's being processed, synthesized, and how individuals are interacting with technology and the privacy risks and challenge associated with each part of that interaction, those phases. But it's really about ensuring that as all of those technological advances are happening, that people, everyday people, you and me and all of us here today, that we remain at the center of the conversation. And I've always been able to take a step back. And even if from the days that I was working on privacy impact assessments to the days that I was, spending countless hours delving into standards and trying to understand how words might be interpreted, I was always able to leave at the end of the day. Maybe I was mentally drained, maybe I was physically drained, maybe I was tired, maybe I was frustrated from challenging conversations, but with a feeling of fulfillment and purpose, and that the work that I was doing was meaningful. And maybe the people who I thought it was meaningful for would never truly realize, and they would always be those individuals like myself who just reads the notice or the cookie banner and clicks the X button. But doing the behind the scenes work to ensure that their information is handled appropriately, to ensure that their information is not being shared with individuals who shouldn't have authorized access to it, to ensure that we're doing our very best to be transparent with individuals with respect to how we're sharing and using their information. I've always found that to be a truly noble calling and something that I've just always fallen back on as a reason to continue doing it and moving forward.
Thanks, Charles. That's really insightful and something that you spoke very passionately to, which I think we heard from Sri and Veronica as well, is the personal nature or the personal appeal to privacy. And I found that throughout my work, the best way to get people interested in privacy, typically from like a compliance perspective, is to make it personal, to think about their own data, the data of their family, the data of their colleagues, the people they work with, and the importance of safeguarding that. Another thing I think that's tied to that is the importance of trust in institutions, whether it's private organizations, public sector, and so forth. That's really very crucial. And I think if we want to improve trust in institutions, it's going to start by taking care of folks' personal data. That's great. Thank you. So Charles, we'll come back to you for the second question here. And just a quick note for our audience, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A section. I'll be skimming through those, and for the last 15-20 minutes, we'll devote that to answering your questions. And I saw that we already have a question that's popped up that's related to this next question. Again, so Charles, we'll start with you. What do you see, as an established leader in this field now, someone who's run privacy programs at, in massive organizations? When you're looking from a hiring perspective, what type of skills are you looking for? What are the top skills for people to succeed? And perhaps most importantly, how do we build those skills? How can we frame previous experience, or what are things that we can do now to position ourselves to be competitive on the job market?
Yeah, sure. So I think first, when I am whether I'm interviewing people or having a conversation with someone who's interested in possibly exploring a career in the area of privacy, the things that I'm looking for are, sort of intellectual curiosity and maybe even strategic curiosity. The ability to ask the right questions and also to see the bigger picture. Because, as you've already heard just from the experience that each of the panelists have shared with you, privacy is never just about a group of privacy professionals getting in a room alone, or a single person getting in a room alone and being presented with a problem and then solving that problem and presenting a solution. It is a team effort, right? And so it's trying to understand, okay, this is the problem that I'm trying to solve. And this is how this problem fits into a bigger picture. This is how the problem fits into how this organization operates. This is how this problem fits into the business of the corporation or the entity. And being a partner. And so being intellectually curious, not just about, the area of practice with respect to privacy and digging into privacy laws and understanding privacy regulations, although I think those things are really important. And you should have the intellectual curiosity to actually look at the law. And sure, maybe you're not an attorney, but as it turns out, most laws are drafted in relatively plain language, plain reading, in which you can read them. And sure, there are countless instances where the courts find interesting nuances in the words that are used, and they're interesting, very complex and deep challenges to what those words actually mean. But I think that as an everyday person, you can certainly look at the law and you can certainly read through it and get a sense of what it means and what the intent is behind the law. And then you could even go a step further, and to the extent that there are implementing guidelines or implementing guidance or implementing regulations, you could review those things as well. And again, because those, not in all instances, but certainly with respect to federal regulations, they're drafted intentionally in such a way that everyday people should be able to read them. And there is a lot of intent and focus around making notices and privacy-related language accessible to people, because part of the goal is to inform people. And so you should certainly do those things, but at the same time, just be intellectually curious about privacy within the organization in which you're operating, right? What is the importance of privacy to your clients, to your customers, to what it is that you're doing? And what are your clients and customers and whatever it is that you're doing, whether or not it's individuals or businesses, expecting you to do with respect to personal information? The other thing is the ability to translate privacy risks, privacy concerns, privacy regulations, privacy laws, those things that you understand and practice in, to translate those across disciplines, right? If you show up to a room with a group of engineers and start reciting, where in the CFR there's a requirement to do X, Y, and Z, you may just lose the audience. They may not maybe they won't take you seriously. Maybe they'll think that you don't understand actually how the technology works, and you haven't approached those individuals with some thought and perspective to the world that they live in and the way that they view and think about things. And so the ability to, I think that when it comes to privacy, because privacy is about human beings, empathy is important in general. So being able to empathize with the people who are your customers, but being able to empathize within the people, with the people within your organization, and speak to them and translate in a way that they understand what you're trying to accomplish. So intellectual curiosity, strategic curiosity, and empathy and translation, I would say.
That's really good. And I think those are transferable skills that a lot of folks are going to be building throughout a degree program or internship, or certainly at other jobs. So I think that's great. And you've provided a really good framework that folks can think about how to translate their own experience into privacy related skills or desirables for a job ad. That's great. Thank you. Sri, we will move over to you. So what do you see at Google are the top skills that the organization is looking for in privacy folks, and how can people start developing those skills and experience?
Yeah, it's not too different from what Charles already mentioned, but when I'm looking at a potential candidate, when I'm conducting interviews, what I really look for is the respect for user privacy, right? That's like the core and like the foundation of any privacy practitioner, and really trying to balance privacy and like the usability of your product, or like of your service, right? So at the end of the day, we work at organizations where you have customers either paying or not paying for like certain services, or like users which are paying or not paying for using certain services which that company has to offer, meaning that we need to make it a productive experience for users when they come to use that particular product or a service, and they get their value out of it while being able to be confident about their data being secure and private. So that's the experience that you want to provide to the users at the end of the day, right? So, in terms of skill set, the translation part, which Charles mentioned, I feel like that's the most important thing. Especially, I've seen that with my own career, especially in incident response. You walk into the room, you're a privacy engineer, or you could have whatever title. You're a privacy risk expert, or you're like a compliance analyst or something. When you walk into a room, you are one part of the problem there, and this actually relates to a broader, you're trying to find a broader solution for the user. So you want to know how you can explain the problem in a way that all your stakeholders are able to understand. And it's essentially you fitting right into that jigsaw puzzle and helping them solve that puzzle. So for which you need to be able to translate everything that's in your head into a language that a lawyer might get it, or like a software engineer would be able to like build the product better from a privacy angle, or like from a compliance perspective, um, how do we add new controls um, to make the situation better, or from a product management standpoint, how do we design this better, and so on. So really trying to look at it from the sense where you explain the problem in a way and you are able to translate the problem in such a way that all the stakeholders in the room are able to understand. I feel like that's the most important thing here, because it's not about you just being able to solve the problem single-handedly. That's not going to happen. That's not how it works. It's that collaboration. And the second thing is really having that. So, look, the point that Veronica mentioned, which I really liked around, you don't need to have the technical background, but you need to have the technical knowledge. So you need to have the inclination to knowing about how this works from a technical standpoint if needed, but being able to understand and the language that the rest of the stakeholders are speaking, you would need to have some sort of a technical knowledge. And to also be able to um, predict the kind of privacy issues that the user can run into in a situation like this, you would need to have some technical knowledge. Um, you would also need to have technical knowledge if you're trying to think from a preventative standpoint. How do we make this service more private for the users? So those are the, just in general, having that um, um, inclination or like that inquisitiveness to like know about how this works from a technical standpoint is important. It's not something that you can completely ignore and try to know only about the law or something like that. And having said that, you don't really need to know all the laws surrounding privacy. The laws are there for a reason, stating, okay, GDPR, these are all the different principles that we want you to abide by. And then you can have a number of privacy laws that came after that, right? So you don't build products for a certain law. You build products which can technically work for any sort of regulations that come by. You don't tailor products for for different laws. That's not how we build products, right? So I think that's another key, is to not put too much focus into trying to understand about the nitty gritty. I mean, if you're a lawyer, sure, like, you need to know that's part of your job. But if you're not, don't try to get caught up thinking that you need to know all of those. Try to understand how to build respectful and private products from different perspectives, other than just trying to check that compliance box. That's not what we're trying to do here. So we're really trying to inculcate that trust in the users.
That's great, thank you. And I think one thing you were touching on very explicitly toward the, well, maybe more indirectly, but I think you articulated very well, is that, again, depending on the size of the organization, you may have your privacy compliance individual who is a hub between other business functions. And so the compliance individual may be working with legal to identify what the software requirements or restrictions are. They're working with product development people to make sure that the product is going to be compliant and focus on user experience. And then you may also have like the technical software engineer folks who are trying to make sure that, well, if we have to satisfy, a data subject request for data erasure, that all of our data is appropriately labeled and, we're able to identify it and, backups and so forth. So that's great. That's a very great perspective. Thank you, Sri. All right, Veronica, over to you. What do you see as the top skills are, and what can people do to build those skills?
Yeah, so I'll start with communication. And that goes from before you're getting into a role, once you're into it, and as you're developing. Communication as someone who either is a junior or someone transitioning into a role, you need to be able to articulate what you know about data privacy. You need to articulate to your peers, to your network, what you're trying to do, what roles you're getting into. And once you get into those interviews, you need to be able to communicate and articulate, again, what you know. How do you build that knowledge base? As Charles mentioned, curiosity, right? You want to continue learning. This is not a role where I can just sit back and say, okay, I'm done learning and I'm going to execute the work. I am learning every day. My weekends I spend reading. I have certifications that I invested into because the learning is ongoing. So starting with right before you get into a role, once you get into an interview, what you need to do, and I think I read something on the questions, like how do you get those interviews? You need to, what I did, and I'll share the tips that I did, I put on my cover letters and on my resume the different titles of programs that I attended. So for instance, there's a Practicing Law Institute. I put the titles and I put a brief summary so that anyone who was reviewing my resume or my cover letter would understand that I didn't have the experience, but I had the foundational knowledge to understand what the role entailed and to get my foot in the door to that interview. So again, communication is key, and our other two colleagues have already stated, communicating with different types of groups, technical, non-technical, the business people, you gotta know how to communicate. Adaptability. This job changes every day. Some days I may be talking to people about compliance, some days about cybersecurity incidents, some days about AI and privacy and data collection and data mapping. Every day is fun, every day is different, every day can be challenging. So having that adaptability mindset, technical awareness, I'll re-emphasize that you do not need the technical background. You need to be aware of technical terminology that will help you, again, communicate and adapt in a good way. And the other thing is risk-based thinking, right? One thing that really, and I'm glad I had this experience before getting into privacy, helped me, my commercial litigation background helps me, and I also have class action litigation background. It helps me think from a risk preventative, a litigation preventative mind frame, so that when I'm helping clients with their privacy program, incident response, AI program, whatever it is, I'm thinking, what can plaintiffs, litigation firms look for? What are the holes that they'll look at? So having that technical awareness, that helps with that. But I would go back to communication being very key from before you get in as a junior, mid-level, communicating your skills and interests, and then once you get in, knowing how to communicate with the different groups.
Fantastic. And you talked just a moment ago about certifications, training, continuous learning that you've invested in. There are a lot of questions on that, so I want to return to that when we get to the Q&A section. And with that, we're approaching the last third of the webinar here. I do want to start transitioning to the Q&A, but before we do that, I'd like to hear from each of you just very briefly. It looks like we have a lot of folks in the audience that are on the job market or actively applying for privacy positions. What is, your top advice? What's the number one thing that you would tell folks who are looking for a job in privacy? And Sri, we'll start with you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was on mute. If I had to give one top tip, I would say stay curious. Really, that empathy factor. If you start to approach problem from like how would I as a user react if I saw this, and how would I like to see it rather, right? So if you try to approach it from that perspective, you would start getting your answers around like how to build better products and like how to approach this from um, um, maybe I'm talking from a more of a privacy engineering lens, but at least when I started preparing for like a privacy engineer role in terms of interviews, I didn't try to think too much about, oh, what's differential privacy, what's secure multi-party computation, and like all of that. No, we don't want all that fancy stuff. We want to know how you would approach a particular privacy problem, and from a review standpoint, what sort of feedback would you provide to a software engineer who presented a certain feature to you? How would you like this product to be designed? What are some of the loopholes that you would look for? Like, try to think of it from that angle rather than just trying to go after like flashy buzzwords or something um, out there.
Wonderful. Charles, over to you. Top piece of advice you'd give to someone who's on the job market and looking to pivot into privacy?
Yeah, start where you are. I think that many people think that you need to have privacy in your title or that you need to have privacy in one of your roles and responsibilities within the organization to really get started. But I mean, if it hasn't come through yet, it surely should have. The privacy is everywhere, right? And so if you're working in HR, if you're working in cybersecurity, if you're working in policy, if you're working in compliance, product design, customer service, look for the privacy dimension in the work that you're already doing and build from there. As a bonus recommendation, I would say read your organization's privacy policies to the extent that you're within the organization, read any internal policy privacy procedures that are available. To the extent that you're interviewing with an organization and you're interested in a privacy role that they have, read the privacy policies that they have posted on their websites, read any policy procedures that may be publicly available, and be prepared to ask questions about them. And maybe they may seem like obvious questions, but it demonstrates that you've taken the time to at least understand how the organization contemplates and thinks about privacy and individuals and risk. And it allows you the opportunity to start a conversation. And you can just be as easy as, hey, I read this in your privacy policy, and I would like to better understand how you do this thing, right? Everyone is given the opportunity to ask questions in an interview. Generally, I'm going to say everybody, generally, you're always given an opportunity to ask questions. One of your questions, if you're interviewing for a privacy role, really, really easy, really, really straightforward. I read somewhere that this is how you think about and do this thing. I would love to learn a little bit more about it. Tell me. It demonstrates that you're intellectually curious. It demonstrates that you've taken a little bit of extra time to try to understand the privacy footprint within that organization and that you're interested in interrogating it.
That's great. And I think that's a sneaky good piece of advice there, to do a little bit of research on the organization, read through their current privacy documentation, what's available. I think that's great. All right, Veronica, over to you.
Yes, so my piece of advice for everyone, whether you're a student transitioning into a role or looking for a role right now, visibility. What do I mean by that? You're on LinkedIn. If you don't have a role in privacy, start sharing articles about privacy. How do you do that? I mean, when I started on LinkedIn, it was crickets. Okay, so I started with something simple. I just read this article about, insert title. It was great because I gave my brief summary. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. You may get crickets at first, but you will start getting engagement. And you will start getting visible to people who are looking for people like you who are interested. I say that because through my engagement in LinkedIn, that's how I got my foot in the door to my first role. Someone who had never, and I kid you not, never commented on any of my posts, never liked, reached out via email for a cyber coffee chat. If you know me online, I love coffee with my oxygen, so I always have a bucket of coffee nearby. So had this chat, the last 5 minutes of the chat, they said, well, you have a certification. So what are you doing with that? And I said, well, I'm doing this, I was doing IP work at that time. Said, are you interested in privacy? And I said, absolutely. That got me in the door to the interviews. Now, to Charles' point, I did my research on the firm. I looked at the privacy policies. I did it with the work that they were doing, but visibility is so key. And I'll translate that. I'll take that into visibility in your resume and your cover letters. Tell the employer, a lot of times systems are using AI technology to review resumes. You need to have the keywords in your resumes, in your cover letters that will get you in the door. It doesn't mean lie because you won't get past the initial interview. It means have the keywords so that you have the visibility to send out and hopefully get your foot in the door for that interview.
That's great, Veronica. And one phrase that came up in the Breaking into AI Governance webinar that we had in October was build in public. And I think that's, when you were talking about visibility, I think it's the same principle at action here, is that if you're preparing for a certification, if you're doing a LinkedIn Learning course or some other online course, try and find, if it's a book, from each chapter, if it's a video, from each video, a course from each lecture, what is your main takeaway from that? And I think just the process of preparing your post, whatever it is that you want to share with people, that is going to help you remember. And so it's multiple birds with one stone here. I think that's really important. Great. So on to a topic, and this is a question I've seen a lot throughout the Q&A so far. Something that's come up from all of you is curiosity, continuous learning. And I think there are, maybe a few different buckets that we would have here. One would be certifications. Another one, conferences such as IAPP conferences, for example. And then another is any type of training or, other reading. So the question for all of you is, what for you is the most important or resources where people can continue to learn or where they can start learning about privacy? Again, certifications, training, online courses, or certificate programs, what would you recommend? And Charles, we will start with you.
So I think one thing for sure is, like Veronica shared, certainly, is LinkedIn is an amazing resource. And sometimes I hear about and learn about things in this area of practice through my LinkedIn newsfeed faster than I will hear about them through distributions from law firms or even potentially like other news feeds that I subscribe to. There are people who are building in public, right? There are people who are putting themselves out there. There are people who are trying to establish themselves as experts in this space. And there are people who I think that I would just recommend that you follow them, right? I would recommend that you do a scan of the environment, try to identify who the influencers are, and I'll say small I influencers in this area, the people who are posting on LinkedIn with some regularity, and follow them. And very, very soon, you'll find that your newsfeed is filled with a lot of amazing resources, whether or not that's webinars, whether or not that's articles, whether or not that's breaking news, whether or not that's industry reports that are being put out by organizations like the Future for Privacy Forum or EPIC or CDT, which brings me to my next recommendation for getting information in addition to LinkedIn. I think that you should identify the organizations that are big players in this field, the advocacy groups that are advocating for privacy legislation and privacy positions. And you should know the people who are authoring those. You should follow them. You should read the authorship, the works that they're putting out, attend the lectures that they're giving, which very often are just publicly available and open source. And there's so much information out there. I don't think that you have to have a certification from any one of the certifying organizations. I think that it's highly recommended, but I don't think that you necessarily have to, and that may be controversial to say on this call and to this forum. But I think that if you are listening to the right people, if you're subscribing to the right feeds, if you're engaging and asking questions in the comment field, people are going to start to recognize and realize that this is an area that you want to practice in, that you're interested in. Your name will start popping up in the newsfeed. They'll be able to see that, like in my newsfeed, I'll see that something will pop up, and then I'll see your name as leaving a comment underneath, and then I'll start to see that more regularly, and that's happening across the board. And so in terms of resources, those would be my recommendations. Pretty much, perhaps a little bit more, not the LinkedIn one, because I think Veronica very eloquently and properly stated that the importance of doing that. But following organizations like CDT and EPIC and Future of Privacy Forum, really, really fantastic organizations doing great work, great research, engage with what they're doing.
That's great. Yeah. And I know Future Privacy Forum, CDT, they put out at least like monthly newsletters where, the areas where they've been active or other news stories and resources, reports and so forth that are really important. What was the third? You said FPF, CDT, and EPIC.
EPIC,
Yeah.
ACLU, also, to the extent that you're interested in civil liberties related issues as an attorney, very good. And then also Better Business Bureau. Better Business Bureau has a whole team that advocates for privacy and tracks those issues.
That's great. Thank you. All right, Sri, over to you. Top resources for continuous learning.
So when I joined Autodesk and I didn't quite have that background in privacy, what I did is attend a lot of privacy meetups. It could be your KnowledgeNet sessions in IPP. It could be like any other sort of privacy meetups going on around you. That really helped me listen, not essentially network connect. Sure, that always happens, but actually listen to the conversations that people were having. That helped me try and understand what is so critical in the privacy industry right now. What are the top problems that the industry is facing? What are the top problems for which we need solutions for? Trying to think from that perspective. So it really helped me understand problem statements, or try to think from my perspective, how can I add more value into the privacy program in my own organization, and so on. So anyway, going back to your initial point, so I think that networking is key, but networking not just for the sake of meeting people, but really trying to understand a little bit more about what's going on in the field is one. Just to, if you're totally new to privacy, that might be a great avenue to start. Really meet people and to know who's the who in the industry, kind of. And that's the more physical way of doing it, and how Charles was saying, follow these people on LinkedIn. That's the more virtual way of doing it. So, and I totally agree with what he mentioned about LinkedIn. It's a gold mine. That's where you need to start. And I have literally followed all of these great practitioners, and that's how my feed is completely filled with all of these, people sharing white papers or privacy research or privacy opportunities and so on. So I'm on maternity leave right now, and every single day I open my LinkedIn just to keep myself, I don't want to lose touch about what's going on in the industry. And I don't need to worry about me having to go here and there to read about it. No, just open LinkedIn, spend 30 minutes, you have everything there. Yeah. So that's literally how you need to surround yourself with the resources that can help you, stay on track and stay current with what's going on. And then of course, from a preparation standpoint, I mentioned about how you take the time to understand how best to solve these problems from a user standpoint, and using that empathy factor as a key.
Fantastic. Thank you. Veronica, over to you.
Thank you. So I would say start with an organization that's focused on the area that you are interested in. So I'll start with IAPP. That's a regular in my feed. I get the emails. I feel like they do timely updates on anything that's going on in privacy. So that's the first one. The second area I recommend is if you're in a particular industry, look for the regulators in those industries because every now and then they will publish white papers or statistics or some sort of report. That way you know where that's coming from. I publish the Canton reports on LinkedIn. And so that's one way in which again, the visibility piece, I've created that where I cover AI, privacy, and cybersecurity subjects in different stages throughout the year. So you can follow that and engage. And again, the experts in those areas, look for them. There are keywords that you can search for. Even if you're not connected with them, follow. You would be surprised at how much information these posts share. And the last tip I'll share is schedule your time to catch up with what's going on. I spend 15 to 20 minutes in the morning while I'm drinking my coffee, right? Coffee theme. I get my coffee and my LinkedIn fix on the latest activity that's going on. And then I know some of the basics. Even if you're just reading the headlines, do that.
Terrific. Yeah. And on the topic of organizations, I'll follow up, with regards to getting experience that a number of organizations are looking for volunteers. And these organizations aren't just, the main headquarters, but local chapters of those organizations. IAPP has come up quite a lot. They have local chapters known as knowledge nets. Those knowledge nets are looking for co-chairs. When I was involved, the co-chair served a 2-year term, and it was rotating. So there would be 2 or 3 chairs for a local chapter, and they're responsible for putting on events, local speaking events. So if there's a co-chair position, apply for it. Otherwise, maybe as a speaker or leading a workshop. And you can find all of the local chapters and the co-chairs on IAPP's website. Similarly, ISC2, which is primarily cybersecurity, they have local chapters. ISACA has local chapters. ISSA has local chapters. And those 3 are organizations that I've recently gotten involved with primarily to learn more about cyber and AI. But surprisingly, they want me to come in and talk about privacy. So I think just because an organization may be focused on just information system security very broadly, there may be a real hunger or desire there to learn about privacy. And so, that may be an opportunity to get involved as well. And as well as training, ongoing developments, those are organizations that are regularly going to be putting on local, both in-person and virtual events. We've got just 1 minute or about 1.5 minutes left. So I'll open this for all 3 of you. One question I saw a couple times was technical resources. So if someone is interested in learning the more technical part of privacy, what would you recommend? I know several of the IAPP certifications have, for those that have textbooks, they have a dedicated chapter or several on some more of those like software basics. So in addition to that, and whoever wants to chime in, what are some good resources to get started with maybe some of that technical information or knowledge?
Let's start with something that helped me tremendously, the IAPP Certified Information Privacy Technologist books, and then the certification. Just reading through those 2 books was extremely helpful in getting the foundation for the technical piece.
That's great. Thank you.
I think there are some great books, the Data Privacy Handbook, and then O'Reilly has some really nice, books on whether it's privacy threat modeling or red teaming or just about privacy enhancing technologies that you want to learn about. I feel like there are a lot of good books and research papers, and so Carnegie Mellon University has a great certification as well on privacy engineering if you want to learn more from a technical standpoint. So yeah, I would say don't wait to see that perfectly lined course on Udemy or Coursera or something where it can stitch together everything for you and you can take in 1 month or 3 months. Just try to find all these information organically, maybe just keep learning and like asking, like, hey, I want to learn about which privacy enhancing technologies exist out there, or like, can I know more about like differential privacy? How do I technically approach it? In which situations would you use differential privacy versus another technology, and so on? So just trying to be curious and asking. Now you have LLMs, you can pretty much like talk to it and it would give you answers. So that's use that to the advantage, I would say.
That's great. Thank you, Sri. Charles, over to you. Any technical 101 primers that you'd recommend?
Sri brought up the Carnegie Mellon program that specializes in privacy engineering. I think that if you are interested in pursuing a technical degree, that's probably one of the best, if not the best, to approach privacy related issues from an information systems and information technology perspective. I think that if you're interested in the weeds IT related issues, just generally, then you're going to want to focus on and keyword search and look for events that include things like privacy engineering or privacy enhancing technologies. If you're interested in perhaps more of a deeper dive into the intersection of privacy law and technology, there's a gentleman named Daniel Solove. Daniel Solove has been working in this space for a long time. He writes a lot. He's one of the primary authors of some of the books that are published related to the intersection of privacy law and technology. A lot of the work that he has done, or at least there's white papers and things that he's written about that are publicly available. I would start there as well. Yeah, and then I guess if you're really nerdy like myself and want to look at it from a technical standards perspective, just read the NIST standards or the ISO standards for privacy risk management, and look at how from a standards perspective these regulatory and statutory requirements are sort of broken down into operational controls that you could implement within an organization. I mean, those can get a little bit technical, but honestly, not so technical that I'm sure most people on the call today would be able to pick one of them up and read through it and derive some value from picking them up.
Wonderful. Just one final word. LLMs are your best friends when it comes to trying to interpret highly technical material, whether it's from like a software engineering point of view or even if it's from law. Just remember that they can hallucinate, they can make mistakes. So maybe a good strategy would be to copy and paste some text that you're struggling with into maybe 2 or 3 models, just to see if it gives you the same interpretation. But if you ask for like a layman's interpretation of some text, they can be pretty good. And with that, we are just a little past time. So again, thank you very much, Charles, Sri, and Veronica. We're grateful for the time that you've given us. We know that you're all very busy professionals. And thank you to the audience as well. This has been recorded and I will be circulating it online. So if you missed a part of it and you want to catch up, that resource will be available soon. So once again, thanks everyone. Have a fantastic afternoon. Happy holidays, and hope everyone has a great rest of the afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Pleasure.
Bye.